Welcome and come on into the Cameralabs Cafe podcast, where we'll be taking a look at some of the Canon PowerShot models, the Sony RX100 Mark VII and the Sony A7R Mark IV. Hello, Gordon. How are you?
I'm very, very hot, Doug. We're recording this on officially the hottest day that has ever struck the UK. Armageddon is approaching. Is it hot where you are?
Not yet, because it's early in the day. It's only 65 Fahrenheit here, so not even 20 centigrade. We're happy.
It feels like 65 Celsius where I am, let alone you don't need to perform the conversion, which is a bit like our currency at the moment. But moving on, Doug, there's something that looks a little bit different about you. You used to have these, last time we chatted, you had these kind of big white bone things sticking out your ears.
Did I ever get flack on that, or what happened? Yes, people complained, well, at least one person complained that the Apple AirPods, or whatever they're called, were a little goofy, so I put on some old earbuds, not earbuds, but whatever these are called. Something darker and less objectionable, I hope.
So in their defense though, what are those Apple? They're Bluetooth, right?
Yeah, they're Bluetooth. They work great. People look really weird with them in, but they're comfortable and they sound terrific. They don't have any noise canceling, but I do like them.
I have seen a lot of people wearing them, and I do kind of agree with some of the comments that they do look a little bit freaky, but then, you know, all fashion setters look a bit freaky at first. You see, you are a trendsetter.
Yes, but now I've gone retro and I'm back to the old style.
Nice one. I've got the cheapest ones that came with my Samsung Galaxy, but I've cunningly wrapped the cable behind the back of my head because I'm that kind of professional. Anyway, let's get on with the show, which, as you will have heard Doug said, we've rebranded as the Cameralabs Cafe. I hope you approve. Since we all enjoy drinking coffee and eating cakes and having a chat about cameras, it seemed an appropriate name. And on today's show, we're going to be talking about lots of different cameras. As always, there are full reviews of all of these at cameralabs.com and on YouTube, so if you want to find out more, that's where you should head. This is more a kind of general chat between Doug and I, where we talk about some things that I've maybe not mentioned in the reviews, or that one or both of us finds a bit interesting or a bit unique about them. And we're going to start with a raft, for it is a raft, of 1-inch class compact cameras that all were kind of released around the same time in mid-2019, within a couple of weeks of each other. There was the Canon PowerShot G7X Mark III, the Canon PowerShot G5X Mark II, and the Sony RX100 Mark VII, all within a couple of weeks of each other, all targeting the same kind of people, which is travel photographers, vloggers, people who film, pieces to camera, it's their all-round cameras. And these products have to try really hard to compete against our phones, because of course the phone is the camera that's always on us, and they are just simply getting better and better and better. So the compacts have got to fight, and they're fighting so hard with new technologies, they're not exactly cheap. So Doug, do you have their prices in ascending order? Let's start with the cheapest model, which is the Canon PowerShot G7X Mark III. How much are you looking at for that?
G7X Mark III here in the US is $749. I should point out that the Mark II you can still get for $100 less here in the US.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the differences between them. Just $100. I was hoping for a bit more. Okay, what do you have to spend extra to get the G5X Mark II?
You spend $899 for the Mark II, and again, the previous model, $699, so it's $200 savings if you go back to the older version of the G5X.
Okay, and topping all of those comfortably is the Sony RX100 Mark VII. Do you know how much that one costs?
That comes in at it'll come in at a terrific $1,200 US.
$1,200? So that's almost like 50% more than the more expensive of the two Canons. So when we're comparing these features, the Sony, I mean, you know, too long didn't read, the Sony has got more features, but hey, guess what? It's also a ton more expensive. So you have to kind of work out whether you're happy to spend this sort of money on a compact camera. I mean, $1,200 could get you a decent interchangeable lens camera, maybe like a Fujifilm X-T30 and a kit zoom. I mean, that's a lovely and pretty compact system, although you're not going to be able to squeeze that in the pocket, which is the key selling point of these three. Now, the Canon PowerShot's really interesting because although Canon is often beaten on features, they're massively popular for their quality out of camera, their ease of use and their ergonomics. And the G7X Mark II was a huge hit with vloggers. Now, the Mark III builds on that by, actually a lot of these features are shared with the G5X II. They both become the first Canon PowerShots to finally film in 4K, and they don't do it with a crop. It actually uses the full sensor width, unlike the Sony RX100 models, which do a little crop for 4K. The G7X Mark III, however, more excitingly, is the first camera of its class to offer a 3.5mm microphone input, so you can actually connect an external mic to it, although the Sony RX100 VII came along after that and also offered that facility, so it kind of trumped that, but Canon still leapt ahead. The G7X Mark III is the first camera in that category that will do live streaming direct to YouTube over Wi-Fi, and also the first one that I saw that will maintain the vertical orientation of video if you want to then use that for posting on, say, IGTV. But Doug, I wanted to talk about the YouTube live streaming first. Is this something that you've tried? Have you ever done live streaming?
I have done live streaming, but it's exciting that you can do it straight from the camera. That's a very unique feature that I think would be very popular with some of the vloggers out there.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I tried it on the G7X Mark III with variable success, and I think the problem was that my home broadband just isn't fast enough. It's really kind of sad to admit it. I use Virgin broadband in the UK, and if there are any other Virgin customers in the UK, they will know that the download speed is respectably quick. You know, it's about 100 to 200 megabits a second. That's really nice. Happy with that. The upload speed is terrible. I get about 5 megabits per second during the day at its fastest. In the evening, it gets even worse. So when I'm uploading videos to YouTube, it takes hours, literally hours, these big 4K files. I have to do them, you know, at the quiet times, and it still takes forever. And 5 megabits per second is pushing your luck for YouTube live streaming. And indeed, the G7X Mark III told me that. What you need to do to make it work is you connect it first of all to your Wi-Fi, and it could in theory be connected to any Wi-Fi hotspot in a cafe or a library. You could even tether it to your mobile phone if it's fast enough. I tried it with mine, it was even slower, so I had an even worse experience. Then you need to grant the camera permission to actually post to YouTube on your behalf, and you do this using the Canon Image Gateway website. This has got a bunch of social services, you know, like Twitter and just normal YouTube, as well as streaming YouTube live. And you basically say, yeah, let the camera post to this service, let the camera post this picture or this comment. And after that, you just go to the Wi-Fi section in the menu, connect your network, and it starts about a minute later. It's very easy to do in practice, but at home I was finding that I could generally stream live for about a minute before the network speed caught up with it and said, no, you're not doing any more. And when I tethered on my 3 mobile phone on Brighton Pier, it cut out almost immediately, which was a real shame because it said it was a 4G connection. And, you know, I mean, for me, this is the thing that, you know, the reason you'd use a camera like this compared to, say, a phone or a webcam is that it potentially offers better quality, and it did for a very short period of time. But Doug, do you think from hearing that, do you think that my bandwidth is probably the problem here?
Yeah, I think it probably is. It sounds more like you're getting hotel service rather than good residential service there. It's the kind of thing you'd expect from a hotel room.
Yeah, and I'm not being tight, because where I live in Brighton, there is literally no other option. There is no BT fibre, which is super duper fast. They have that in the town centre. They don't have it in my neighbourhood. So there's a bunch of sort of freelance, self-employed creatives in my neighbourhood who would wish that British Telecom would do what they need to do to update the box at the end of our streets to allow us to have fibre to our houses, because I cannot provide you with the service that you deserve.
Well, we have fiber to about 1/4 mile from my house, and then it's coming over coax from there, but I'm paying a little premium. I'm getting almost a gigabit download and 30 megabits up. So I'm spoiled rotten.
That would be nice. That would be nice. So it would work for you. I did try the vertical formatted video. That's nice if you want to post direct to, say, IGTV. The biggest feature, though, for me on the G7X Mark III is the microphone input, and this absolutely transforms the kind of audio quality that you're going to get from it. Now, if you're familiar with these cameras, there is no accessory shoe on them, so you can't mount a hot shoe microphone on top of these things, and even if there was a hot shoe, the screen would block it or it would block the screen because it flips up over the top. So you're going to need to get a little bit creative and use some sort of bracket underneath, but you know, who cares? Because we've been asking for this feature for years and years, and finally it's here. And 2 weeks after Canon announced it on the G7X Mark III, Sony announced it on the RX100 Mark VII, so now we have not one but two 1-inch class compact cameras with microphone inputs, and I tried them with both with a Rode shotgun microphone and also with the Rode Wireless Go. And in fact, if you think that the quality you're watching right now is any good in terms of video and audio, well, give a big hand to the Sony RX100 Mark VII, because I'm actually filming this segment of the podcast with that camera. I'm filming it in 1080 at 24p, and I'm using the Rode Wireless Go connected to its external microphone input. And if all goes well, that'll be the audio you hear. I also have backup audio being recorded with another microphone, and I'll flash up a message on the screen if I'm using that file instead. But hopefully it's sounding pretty good, and I just love that flexibility. Doug, do you use any, I think you used one of the old Sony RX100 models. You always used to call it your 24-70 in a pocket. Are you excited about the new one?
I've got it right here in my hand. This is my Mark IV, which I've had for a number of years. You can look back to whenever the Mark IV came out. I am excited. I skipped the Mark V, I skipped the Mark VI. You want to get into that? You want to get into the RX100?
Yeah. Let me tell you what you get with each of those. Well, no, actually, before that, let's just wrap up the Canons for a minute, because while everyone's getting excited about the G7X Mark III, there was also the G5X Mark II, and this is a slightly curious camera because what Canon have done is completely revamped the design of this camera. Now, the first version of this, the Mark I, looked like a mini DSLR. It looked like also the G1X Mark II or III. It's a really cute little camera with a viewfinder hump on the top, a fully articulated side hinge screen. Looked super cool. But with the new model, they've gone for basically the same exterior design, or almost the same design, as the G7X Mark III and the Sony RX100 series. So they look almost the same. Now, the differentiator between them was always the viewfinder, and it still has a viewfinder, but it's a pop-up one. It's no longer in a viewfinder hump on the top, but it's an older generation one. I'll talk about that in just a second. Also, the screen is now the same as on the G7X Mark III, so it will flip up to face you, but it no longer flips out to the side. So they've taken away a lot of things that made the G5X Mark I unique and, to me, kind of more desirable, but they know their market. Obviously, it maybe didn't sell as well as they hoped it would. As a sweetener, what they've done is put in a slightly longer zoom range. So instead of 24-100 on the G7X Mark II and III and on the G5X Mark I, they've now extended it from 24-120mm. And that extra 20mm really does help. It also has the viewfinder, but it doesn't have the microphone input. And you kind of look at the G7X Mark III and you go, I like it. I love the microphone input, but I want the longer zoom of the G5X and the viewfinder. And then you look at the G5X and you go, I like the zoom, I like the viewfinder, but I want the mic input of the G7X Mark III. And I know this is a classic case of, you know, gear acquisition greediness, or gag, or whatever you want to call it, syndrome. But why not? Why shouldn't we have it? Or why, you know, why not merge these two products into one? Why are they two separate lines? It frustrates me because you know, it does, however, make the G7X cheaper because it doesn't have the viewfinder. So you do save, what is it, about $100, $150 difference? Is it about that?
Let's see, $749. Yes, $150 more for the G5X Mark II.
So for that, you're getting the viewfinder, the slightly longer zoom, but you're losing the microphone input and the YouTube live streaming. I want it all in one, ideally for about the same price as the G5X Mark II, because that still undercuts what Sony's doing. But interestingly, both of these cameras are a bit old-fashioned in two respects. Well, both of them in one respect, which is the sensor. So Sony has probably provided the sensor for these cameras, given that it provides the sensor for almost everybody. And Canon describe it as a stacked CMOS design, and it can shoot very quickly and it can do 4K video. It doesn't have phase detect AF though, which is the confident autofocus system for movies and stills that was brought in with the RX100 Mark V, which makes me think it's actually the same sensor that's in your RX100 Mark IV. Now, no one will confirm this, no one would ever admit this or tell me the truth about these, but I'm pretty sure the two new Canon PowerShot G7X III, G5X II, have the RX100 IV sensor, so that is 3 generations ago. It's a fine sensor, but it doesn't do phase detect autofocus, which is frustrating to say the least. And in my tests, you know, if you stand in front of these two new Canons and stay mostly still, it will focus on you and it looks nice. But if you move back and forth, it's just not focusing as confidently as the Sonys do. Now, the other thing that's slightly odd about it, if you're familiar with the Sonys, is the viewfinder on the G5X Mark II is similar to that on the RX100s 3, 4 and 5. Keeping all of these numbers in my head is driving me mad, especially in the heat. In that you had to pop it up and then pull it out. You know the action that's on yours, Doug?
Yeah.
You pop it up.
Pop it up, if you push the button right, and then you have to pull it out this way. I don't know if that shows on the camera, but anyway, that's it.
Now, it's not that inconvenient, but Sony developed a new mechanism on the RX100 Mark II, which did that in a single push, up and down. It just popped out and it was ready to use, and you could push it down in one motion. And it sounds lazy, but it's little things like that that really do make it more convenient. That was brought in the RX100 Mark VI, and the Mark VII has that as well. So when you switch between these cameras and you go to the Canon, you know, between the G5X Mark II and the RX100 VII, on the Canon, you lose the phase detect AF, you lose that kind of one-touch viewfinder mechanism. It feels a little bit old-fashioned. It's like you've gone back in time a little bit, which is frustrating. And you look at the Canon and you think, I wish it had phase detect AF like which was brought in the Sony RX100 Mark V, but that camera is more expensive. That camera is, I think, still $1,000. So you can have phase detect AF, but it's going to cost you. And now what the RX100 Mark VII does is it basically inherits the lens of the Mark VI, so it's 24 to 200 mil. Like the last model, it loses the built-in neutral density filter, and it's not as bright as the Canons or the RX100 V. So, you know, for interior vlogging in low light, or for exterior movies where the neutral density filter really helps you keep those shutter speeds nice and slow, it's not ideally suited, but it's got that microphone input, which is great. It's got an even better autofocus system than before. It has improved 4K stabilization, which it needed because the Mark V and VI, the stabilization wasn't great in 4K. Now it is really good. It's got active steady shot. But here's the thing, Doug, right? We can talk about the lens in just... No, let's talk about the lens now. Are you excited about going from a 24 to 70 range to a 24 to 200 range, albeit with a slower aperture?
Well, I'm not going to be able to call it my 24 to 70 in a pocket any longer. I'm going to have to call it something else. I'm excited about it. Given the number of years since I upgraded to this model, I'm ready. And I use this camera quite a bit, so I'm ready for something new. But I'll tell you my one concern, and I'm going to ask you the question because I haven't had my hands yet on a Mark VII. I am concerned about the fact that I'm losing about a stop and a half of aperture. Does the new sensor, do you think, make up for that? The sensor and the processing to keep the noise down. Am I going to notice if I'm shooting wide open that it's much noisier at higher ISOs?
Yeah, you will. You lose a stop and a bit at the wide end, and when you get to about 70mm on both of those cameras, you'll notice it loses about a stop as well. So that means it's using double the ISO sensitivity under the same conditions, and on these cameras, in low light, you know, the difference between 16 and 3200 or 3200 and 6400 can be quite significant. So that is frustrating. And if you mostly shoot in low light, I would probably encourage you to stay with one of the shorter, brighter zoom models. But if you shoot mostly outdoors, you will revel in the new zoom range. That is just incredibly flexible. I took the Mark VI away on a 1-month European trip that started in Brighton and ended in St. Petersburg last summer and back again. And I had a bigger system camera with me, and I had the RX100 Mark VI. I wrote a blog article about it at Cameralabs.com if you're interested. It was brilliant. Well, the trip was brilliant too, but the little RX100 was just so flexible. And the thing that really surprised me is sure, it wasn't totally sharp in the corners at 24mm, but it was much better than you'd expect at 200. And just being able to go around like the towns and being able to like zoom in on urban details and stuff and have that nice compressed perspective, or go to zoos or even see wildlife in the wild and get a decent image of it. It's just so flexible. And then when you couple that with the phase detect autofocus system, you've got a camera that can actually shoot action, you know, and sports or active kids and pets. And the Mark VII builds on that with Sony's latest autofocus. I mean, it's not like anyone complained. No one has ever said about a Sony camera, do you know, this camera would be better if it was faster, if it shot faster, had more AF points, or better, more intelligent autofocus, because they've always been way ahead of everybody on that. Well, it's now even more ahead than it was before. You don't need it, but it's nice if it's there. So you now get eye detection in movies. It did kind of need that. You get the real-time AF tracking, which works brilliantly, because as soon as it sees a face, it goes to face detection. As soon as it sees an eye, it goes to eye. And then if it doesn't see either of those, it goes to this really smart object tracking. And it just seamlessly switches between these three modes really, really effectively. It also supports the human and animal eye detection. I tried it with a couple of dash hunts that I know in Brighton. I also worked with a seagull that's living on my roof at the moment, and you may indeed hear it today because my window is open. It keeps trying to get inside. So there's a real threat during this podcast video that a seagull will come in and land on my head, or maybe start pecking the RX100. But perhaps one of the most exciting features that no one's talking about on the RX100 Mark VII is the fact that it has the heat warning menu option that's made it onto some of the recent interchangeable lens Sony cameras. This is the first time that this menu option has been available on an RX100. And what it lets you do is basically ignore the overheating warning. Now, don't worry, it won't cause any damage to the camera, but the camera will get hot. So if you're hand holding it, it will become uncomfortable, but if you've got it on a tripod, it doesn't matter. And here's the difference it makes. Now, previously, up to and including this model, when you have that heat temperature warning on, it will stop recording 4K after just 5 minutes. It's a little camera, it gets hot. You cannot do clips of 4K longer than 5 minutes, which does limit its usefulness, especially when you're vlogging or doing a long piece to camera. But, and I also found that if you were to film 2 or 3 of those in a row, well, that would be it. It would overheat, shut down, and you'd need to leave it for like 10 or 15 minutes to cool down. You may hear the seagulls in the background. They know what's happening. And Canon actually kind of got an edge on them with the G5X V Mark II and the G7X Mark III, because their 4K video can film 10-minute clips. Take that, Sony, 10 minutes compared to your 5. That is actually a lot more useful. But if you turn that heat warning off, basically the RX100 Mark VII will keep recording until it either runs out of power, runs out of memory, or literally, you know, gets so hot it gets into trouble. It will shut itself down if it feels it's getting itself into trouble, so don't worry about that. Amazingly, last night, when it was still very hot in this room, I set the RX100 Mark VII recording in 4K at 24p, and it went beyond 5 minutes, it went beyond 10 minutes, it went beyond that half-hour limit that a lot of cameras are stuck at. It went beyond 1 hour, and it basically ran out of memory and battery at around the same time after about an hour and 5 minutes. An hour and 5 minutes on a single 4K clip on a pocket camera. Now, this camera was hot to the touch afterwards, but you know, it cooled down fast enough. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's very impressive. Like you say, I think a lot of people might be a little afraid of turning off the heat warning, but I'm glad you explained it. I want to mention a couple of things that have come up in my head while you were talking about these. First of all, the G7X Mark III, I believe your review said there's no 24p video, which is surprising.
Yeah, this is bizarre. So Canon has got some real downer on 24p at the moment. It's on some of its larger format cameras, it's removed it. Maybe just in 1080 or in some modes it's there, and in others it's not. But on the G7X Mark III and the G5X Mark II, it's gone altogether. 24p is not available in 1080 or 4K. Now, you do have 25p when it's set to PAL, and you have 30p when it's set to NTSC, and you can switch that on any model. It's just in the TV system setup menu. But why get rid of 24p? That's my first question. My second question is it an issue? Now, I know a lot of people love filming in 24p, and in fact, we're filming this in 24p. It is the cinematic frame rate. But is 25 close enough? Will it cause frame rate issues with the frequency of artificial lighting, for example? What do you think, Doug? Is the lack of 24p a big issue for you?
It's really an issue only in 2 situations. One is where you have to be compatible with other footage and you want everything to be at 24p. The other is, like you say, with lights. I mean, we've gotten into a weird situation recently shooting dance. A lot of the theatrical lights now are LED based, some of the accent lights. And they cause horrible problems based on frame rate and electronic shutters and so forth. I don't think it's a big deal, but I don't do as much video as you do. So it's a bit of apples and oranges for me. I want to mention one other thing about the RX100 Mark VII. And that is, according to what your notes have said, because I haven't seen it yet, but it doesn't have blackout during its rapid frame rate. And that to me is a big deal, because I've had that on my Sony A9, which cost a fortune more than the RX100. But that's a big feature for shooting at high burst rates when you're trying to track birds in flight and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the older Mark VI and the Mark V shot at 24 frames per second, but with viewfinder blackout. Now, because 24 is so fast, in between frames, even if it is playing back the previous image, it's fast enough that you can track pretty effectively. But Sony's kind of adopted a lot of its A9 technology in this latest version. Now it shoots slightly slower, actually, at 20 frames per second, but with no blackout. And the experience is just like shooting with the A9. And it also features all of the latest, or most of the latest autofocus algorithms that are on the A9 if you've updated it to its latest firmware. There are obviously some differences. There are obviously benefits to still shooting with the A9, you know, but still, it is incredible.
I want to make sure we explain what this blackout is, because a lot of people won't have experienced this, or they've experienced it and don't notice it. I'll give you my layman's understanding of it, and then you can correct me. But basically, when you're shooting at a high frame rate and you're following a moving object, you're normally, without this no blackout feature, you'd be looking at essentially a playback. So you're looking at sort of one frame behind. And if you're trying to follow something in motion, you'll find that you can't really track it, because what you see through the viewfinder is a fraction of a second old. So the no blackout means that you're actually tracking it in real time. Now, was I close to being accurate in that description?
You were 100% accurate, and to make it even easier, I'm showing a clip now that actually shows the RX100 Mark VII shooting at 20 frames per second with no blackout. This is Ben cycling towards me, and it's just completely live feedback, effectively, is what you're getting. So it's fantastic for action, and that's the thing, is that, you know, when you compare it to the Canon, I mean, the Canons, once you've seen the Sony doing face and eye detection across the entire frame confidently, it can be a real shock to go back to the Canons and find out when you have them set to servo AF, which is their continuous autofocus mode, face detection is disabled. If you want face detection, it's only available in single AF. If you want continuous servo AF, it's basically a single area. So if you plop it in the middle of the frame and move away from the middle of the frame, there is a very real chance that the camera is not going to focus on you. Or, you know, it's ridiculous in comparison. But again, as I say in my reviews, it's very easy to get caught up in the excitement of no viewfinder blackout, 20 frames per second, incredible autofocus. Are you going to use that? You know, it is amazing technology. It works brilliantly. It does make things better and easier. But if you're not shooting action or fast action, it's not that important. And in fact, the other thing to say is they've got an even faster shooting mode on the RX100 Mark VII. It is a new single burst mode that's so fast, even Sony can only capture 7 frames. Just 7 frames, but up to 90 frames per second. Now you do the math. That's not a long period of time, and there's no pre-buffering. So the moment you've got to press that shutter at exactly the right time. And I was trying to find things to test this with, and eventually the best success I had was dropping a block of wood in a bucket of water again and again until I got the timing right. And it was fun when it worked, but the whole time I was thinking, do you know, I wish this had a kind of pre-burst buffering feature like the Lumix cameras, and interestingly, a feature that is also now available on the Canon PowerShot G5X II and G7X III. They have a new raw burst mode that can fire very quickly, not as quickly, but it does offer a pre-buffering option. So you have it rolling, and then as soon as you see the action, click, you know you've got it. And for someone like me with slow reactions, you know, when a bird takes off, I know I've got that moment, whereas on the RX100 Mark VII, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't capture that moment. Are you excited about would you use any of these burst modes?
I would probably shoot at up to 10 frames a second. 20 is a little bit fast for anything I do. I don't normally shoot anything in burst mode, but every once in a while I'll do that. I'll do short bursts. You know, let's say I'm shooting models, or I'm shooting dance. The challenge is you don't want to get them when they're blinking. You don't want to get the eyes closed. And if you shoot at a low burst rate, just shoot 3 frames, you'll get one where their eyes are open. And that to me is a big difference, because if I'm shooting single shots, I've got a 1 in 10 chance that their eyes are going to be closed. So I like shooting very, very short bursts. So I'm going to use it.
Now, just wrapping up these compact cameras, because it's time we should talk about something else. The two kind of overriding things that really struck me when I was testing them, because I tested all 3 of these cameras at the same time. there is this real feeling that when you're just testing one camera and it doesn't have a certain feature, you don't miss it. But when you've got another camera right next to it with that feature, my God, you do miss it. And for me, that feature, well, one of those features was having a viewfinder. And not having a viewfinder on the G7X Mark III really, really reduced my enjoyment of using that camera. Although, to be fair, if it's mostly focused at vlogging with the screen flipped up to face you, that viewfinder would have been redundant anyway. So I do get Canon's way of thinking for this. It's providing a cheaper viewfinderless version if that's what you want. However, for just sort of general shooting, I want that viewfinder. And the G5X II and the Sony RX100 VII have that. I assume you're similar in that regard, right?
Yeah, I think that for the Canon line, it's pretty clear. The G7X Mark III is the better camera for video and vlogging. There's no doubt about that. The G5X Mark II, probably better for still photography because it has the viewfinder. The RX100 Mark VII really covers the whole range. It covers video, it covers still quite well. I'm looking forward to it. I am going to order one. And by the way, I also think that the one-step pop-up EVF on the RX100 Mark VI and VII is a big plus. I don't use the EVF often. I'll use it when the ambient light is too bright for me to use the rear display. But I'll often pop that thing up and forget to pull it out and wonder when I look through the EVF why everything is so blurry. And then I say, oh, I forgot to pull the thing out. And by that time, I may have lost the shot. So I think that's a great combination. I'm looking forward to that.
Also, every time you have your hands on that viewfinder head, there is a chance that you might knock the diopter adjustment. So even when you do pull it out, you might slightly knock it off. You can also set up the camera on the Sonys to configure it to either shut down and start up the camera with a pop-up or down or not. So it's up to you. You can configure it either way, which is really nice because I know some people, I kind of, when I initially was pushing down the viewfinder and the camera was switching off, that used to annoy me because I was like, hey, I haven't finished taking pictures yet, and I had to power it up again. But now I quite like that. I use it as like a casual shortcut, like, you know, the old kind of Matrix banana phones on the Nokias. You just go click, or, you know, like the flick, clip like that, and it's a very satisfying, right, I've finished now, that's it, I've clipped the viewfinder down, I know that the lens is going to retract, I can stick it in my pocket without even looking at it. The one final thing I will say, though, is that I did on the RX100 Mark VII, which has it all, apart from the bright lens with the neutral density filter, and it did make me think back to the RX100 Mark V, which does have that lens. Sony has that lens in its range. It has a lens that's bright at 24mm. It has an ND filter, which is great for video. It has phase detector AF. All that camera needs is a one-touch viewfinder, a touch screen, and most importantly of all, a mic input. Sony, if you do a special edition of the RX100 Mark V, you will delight vloggers the world over, and it will be the ultimate vlogging camera. There'll be none of this, oh, should I get this, that one, or that one? Shall I sacrifice this feature for that? That will have it all. And then you can develop the Mark VII line as the travel version with the longer but dimmer zoom.
I think we should call it the Cameralabs Signature Edition.
Exactly, exactly. We could do a Kickstarter.
Yeah, right.
Or not.
That would be terrific. Right. Yeah, we'll raise $1,000, send it to Sony and say, based on this, we think you should come out with the Cameralabs Signature Edition.
You think we'd get as much as $1,000?
I was being nice.
Should we move on and talk about something else?
Well, that should be enough to sway Sony's opinions, don't you think?
Maybe.
Yeah, let's go on. What do you want to talk about, the big Sony?
Yeah, tell us about that. So what are we going to talk about and how much does it cost?
Okay, an A7R Mark IV. Wow, they're coming out with these things so fast. How much does that cost? Let's see. That's $3,500 here in the US. And just to give you a comparison, the Mark III, still a spectacular camera, $2,500. So it's $1,000 less, and they have started now, they've discounted it, so that's the discounted price on most places in the US, $2,500. Mark II, also still available, $1,500. And I want to compare it to the A9. The A9 is now discounted $1,000 here in the US. So the A9 and the A7R Mark III are the same price here in the US, making it a tough call for people to pick one of those two.
Well, the A7R Mark IV, well, the A7R line is, of course, Sony's high-resolution line. On the Mark II and the Mark III, it was 42 megapixels. Now with the Mark IV, they've developed a new sensor. It's 60 megapixels. So it was interesting, when Sony was at 42 megapixels, Canon had a high resolution full frame sensor in the 5DS and 5DSR, 50 megapixels. Nikon has a high resolution sensor, Panasonic has a high resolution full frame, and it was interesting that Sony was allowing itself to be beaten in the numbers game when traditionally it wouldn't allow that to happen. Well, now it's leapfrogged all of the competition for now, as of mid-2019. I'm sure that there are high resolution full frame bodies coming from the other companies at some point in the near future. But right now, at the point we record this video, Sony is the leader. And it's quite interesting to look at the A7R Mark IV, which is offering 60 megapixels for $3,500, versus say a Fujifilm GFX 100, which offers 100 megapixels for 10,000. Now, completely different. Apples and pears, oranges, lemon sherbet, custard surprise. I don't know where I'm going with that. They are different types of cameras, right? But if you want to generate a 100 megapixel image, you could do it with a full frame camera with 2 shots and stitch them together. And in fact, the difference between 60 and 100 might not be as great as you think, especially if your technique isn't spot on and your lenses aren't optimally set and are great lenses to start with. So Sony is saying that, they're saying, hey, who needs medium format when you've got this? Well, there is a difference between them, and the GFX 100, which I've also now completed my final review of that, it is giving you 100 megapixel images that look fab, out of camera, and with a single shot. Right? If you want that with a full frame camera at the moment, you're going to need to stitch a couple of images together or use some sort of composite mode. And it's interesting that Sony has enhanced the pixel shift mode that was introduced on the A7R Mark III, at least in Sony's line. That previous model would shoot 4 frames and combine them to effectively eliminate the Bayer color filter array. So the file was still 42 megapixels. The spatial resolution was the same, but the color resolution was higher and there were less color moire artifacts. Now, what they've done with the Mark IV is offer a 16 frame version of that pixel shift mode, which not only demosaics the Bayer for color resolution, but also increases the overall resolution. And they're claiming up to 240 megapixels. Now, obviously, diffraction plays a big part of this, as does everything else, motion in the picture. But I've looked at a before and after of these, of my own test files, and they're at Cameralabs.com. It's better. It's not 240 megapixels. It's not, it's not whatever it is, 4 times better, but it's better. It's more than 60, definitely, for some subjects. And that looks really nice. Frustratingly, it doesn't do it in camera, and it doesn't make it easy for you either. You need to use Sony's Imaging Edge software suite on a desktop computer or a laptop computer. I ran it on my Mac. And you've got to find the files, find the 16 files. Once you identify them in there, because it's hard to tell which are the, in a normal file browser, you can't tell whether it's just a normal RAW file or a pixel shift RAW file. So you've got to kind of group them together. You've got to search them out and then feed them into this software, and then it outputs this file. It's a bit of a faff, but it does work. Are you excited about the extra resolution of this camera?
For me personally, no, because I tend not to shoot things that don't move. Most of my photography is moving objects, usually people. However, I've seen the results of this. I should say also, can we start referring to it as a 1/4 gigapixel?
Let's do it.
Right? I want to explain the Bayer business. So in the Bayer sensor, in any little quadrant, you have 2 greens, a red, and a blue. And that's the pattern. So when somebody says you have a 40 megapixel camera, I believe they're counting each one of those little sites as a separate pixel. So a 40 megapixel image actually only has 10 megapixels if you count each cluster of 4 as a single one. In this pixel shift mode, what Sony, I believe, is doing is literally shifting the sensor by one of these Bayer elements. So you're essentially getting every pixel is covered with a full red, 2 greens, and a blue. And that means, as you said, you're going to get much more color resolution as opposed to the gimmicks and the tricks that it has to play to interpolate color from pixel to pixel. That's a huge difference. And I've seen some tests. I've not run them myself, but when they're properly done, the resolution is quite phenomenal.
Now, beyond resolution, there are some other, because that's the big sell on the A7R Mark IV for stills photographers. One of the other big sells is that Sony has made a number of ergonomic improvements that really do make a difference. It's not as significant as when they went from the Mark IIs to the Mark IIIs, but it's still significant nonetheless. So the things that I really noticed were an improved joystick, lockable exposure compensation dial, thank the Lord, although it feels a bit inconsistent because the EV dial has got a kind of ballpoint pen style. You've got to pop it and it's locked, pop it again, it's unlocked. Whereas the mode dial, you have to hold it down and turn it. I think they should both be the same. Is that just me? Do you think they should be the same?
Well, you know, you get used to it. I've got different knobs and dials on my A9 too. They're not consistent across the board. They're all better than they used to be. So I'm not going to complain.
And the buttons now are bigger and more tactile than they used to be. And this is something that we've been requesting in reviews for ages. It sounds like a small improvement, but it actually makes a big difference in day-to-day use. You also get dual UHS 2 card slots, something that should have been there on the Mark IIIs and on the A9 and wasn't. Only one of those could exploit the full speed of UHS 2. So now at least both of those slots can do that. It's a high resolution viewfinder, the 5 million dot viewfinder. That's already in the Lumix S1 and S1R bodies, as well as the Fujifilm GFX100. As we said before, you know, these panels are not unique. As soon as someone comes out with them, you gradually see them deployed across all of the high-end. So expect all high-end cameras to have this 5 million dot viewfinder kind of going forward. And of course, it looks brilliant, especially when you're manually focusing or looking at very fine detail. One of the other things that you really notice compared to the Mark IIIs is there's more room in the grip for your fingers. The distance between the grip and the lens mount is now a little bit wider than it was before. Now, I haven't got big hands or fat fingers. It's not like I've got fat fingers, big fingers, but even my fingers could get a bit pinched on the Mark III and the A9. It's quite tight in there, especially if you've got a big lens. But now on the A7R Mark IV, there's more room, and you know, all these little things add to it. Did you do any of those little ergonomic benefits appeal to you?
There are a lot of interesting things about this. I want to mention some of the things from your review. One is that this also has the new hot shoe. So that's a big deal because of this mic. I want you to talk a little bit about that microphone because it's very, very unique.
The microphone is a really interesting accessory. It is a new hot shoe. It is a traditional hot shoe shape with the traditional contacts. You can mount normal hot shoe things on it, accessories on it. So it's not that it's a new design, but it has got some little pins at the end of it, which are proprietary and are designed to work with this new Sony digital microphone. So most microphones would talk to the camera through an analog interface. So they're capturing the sound analogly, obviously, and then it comes out of the microphone as an analog signal, it goes into the camera as an analog signal, and then the camera has an analog to digital converter. So the quality of the audio is often very much influenced by the quality of the A to D converter in the camera, as well as any preamplifiers that get that signal up to the level it needs to be. Well, on the A7R Mark IV, it's a digital interface. So this is quite unique to start with. It means that the microphone has the analog to digital converter inside. And because it's designed for audio, it's a microphone, they've put a decent one in there. You see, with cameras, they don't always put a decent one in because, you know, it could be used by someone who's not going to use audio at all on it. But the microphone, of course, that's what it's been used for. So it's got a decent A to D in it. Since it's in the digital domain in the microphone, it also allows them to do some really clever DSP things with it. You can actually adapt the sound and play with it. Now, I did some tests with this microphone, and they're part of my review at Cameralabs.com and on YouTube of the A7R Mark IV. And what it lets you do is simulate different types of microphone patterns. You can have a wide omnidirectional type pattern that's capturing sound from all around, because I think there's like 8 modules along the top of it. Capsules rather, or you can focus it to more of a kind of very directional shotgun type style. So this gives it great flexibility, but there's also the ability to apply noise reduction. Now, like a lot of digital noise reduction, it can sound a little bit like you're underwater at times, or it can sound a bit weird, but at other times it can work really well. And overall, I was super impressed with the microphone. This is a real key accessory for the A7R Mark IV, and presumably for the, you know, the Unicornia A7S update, whenever that arrives from Fantasyland. You know, this microphone is going to be a key accessory for that. And it does, you know, there's not a lot for movie shooters in the A7R Mark IV. It's pretty much the same as the Mark III, but the new microphone is a key benefit. I just wish they'd put this hot shoe on the RX100 Mark VII. How good would that be to use that digital mic on it?
Oh, that would look so weird because this microphone is strange looking as it is. When I first saw it, I said, isn't it missing some pieces? It doesn't look like a normal microphone. And you put that on the RX100, get this little teeny camera, and it's well, it's not gigantic, but a comparatively large microphone. Yes, I'd like to see that though, because it does seem like quite an excellent microphone. Unusual, to be sure.
Well, I think we've talked enough about the A7R Mark IV right now. As always, if you want more information on any of these cameras, just head over to Cameralabs.com or YouTube and you'll find all of the stuff I know about them there. I just wanted to kind of wrap up by talking about some new lenses that have been announced recently. There's so many lenses around at the moment. It's a really exciting time. In particular, launched within a very close period with two 35mm lenses native to the Sony E-mount. Yes, I know this is turning into a bit of a Sony show, isn't it? There was Sony's own FE 35mm f1.8 and the Sigma Art 35mm f1.2, which is Sigma's first native E-mount lens. It means that it's specifically designed for the E-mount as opposed to a kind of adapted version, which the other Art Primes were. So these are two really exciting lenses. The Sigma, because it's got such a bright aperture and it's native, completely native. And the Sony, because even though it's not a G or a G Master, it's just a lens. It doesn't have a letter after it. It's not part of any of their premium series. So you might think, oh, is the quality going to be a bit rubbish on it? It's not. I've used it and the quality is really very, very good on it. And it's small as well, smaller than it looks in the pictures. It's actually roughly the same size as the FE 55mm 1.8, one of those lenses that launched the full-frame Sony system start with. So it's that sort of compact, but quality-wise, it's sort of similar to the FE 85mm 1.8, which also isn't a G or a G Master lens. So out of those two, Doug, do you shoot much in the 35mm length? Are you excited about either of them?
I use that focal length a lot. I have the older 35mm f2.8 ZA lens, Z alpha lens, which was also one of the first lenses to come out for these cameras. I like that lens a lot. It's, like I say, it's f2.8, but what's interesting is it's essentially, let's see, it actually costs $50 more than this 35mm f1.8.
It's a tiny lens though.
Tiny, it's very, very small. It's got a marvelous built-in lens shade that you leave on all the time. It's terrific. But again, it's an f2.8, not an f1.8. So I'm very intrigued by this new one. Of course, then there's the $1,500 35mm f1.4, which is also a terrific lens, but that's $750 more than this new one.
Yeah, now we recently compared both of those lenses at Cameralabs.com, and I remember that 35-1.4 also a Zeiss lens. When I first looked at it, I thought this lens is amazing, but now actually comparing it to even newer lenses, it's amazing how much they move on, and in fact, it might not be quite as good as you remember. So this really modern 35-1.8 is potentially offering some really good performance for the money, and it's about half the price of the Sigma 1.2 are. Although their art lenses have been great, I'm really looking forward to seeing what that's like. Those reviews will be at Cameralabs.com. And also, I should say that Thomas, who does the lens reviews for Cameralabs, has recently tested the Tamron 17-28mm f2.8, again, a native Sony E-mount lens. We might as well just call this a Sony show, this episode, which is a really affordable ultra-wide zoom. I mean, it's way cheaper than the Sony's own FE 16-35 2.8. Obviously, it doesn't zoom quite as wide or quite as long, but it's still a flexible range, 17-28. It's still f2.8 constant, and it's performing pretty well. So check out our review of that if you're interested in that. Doug, out of any of those lenses, anything you're particularly excited about?
Well, I'm actually interested in the Sigma, the 35mm f1.2 art lens. That's $1,500, so it costs the same as the f1.4 Sony, all right? I'm particularly interested in, first, that's really fast, f1.2. I've gotten used to shooting in such low light that the difference, for example, for me, I shoot the 85mm f1.4 from Sony. My friend shoots with the f1.8, and there's a difference. There's a difference that we notice in our images because I can shoot just that extra half a stop better. But this camera, this lens, I got to tell you one thing I love about the Sigma. It has a real aperture ring that you can put in automatic mode. And I just like that kind of control instead of having to mess with all the soft dials. So that's a feature I like a lot in the lens. I haven't used the lens. I think you've done some tests with it, I believe, haven't you?
Yep, yeah, and if you want the full report on that, you know, They're all at cameralabs.com. I think we've run out of time on this show to delve into that any further, but in a future show we're going to talk more about lenses and also Doug's experience with lots of different lenses, and also shooting street with Panasonic's 6K photo mode. We're going to talk about that in a future show, aren't we?
We are, absolutely. Well, Gordon, I want to thank everybody for listening. Thank you, of course, for all of your sage advice. Remind everybody to visit Cameralabs.com for in-depth reviews of cameras, lenses, and everything else you can imagine. If you want to support us, please buy us a cup of coffee. You'll find links on the Cameralabs.com website. What am I missing, Gordon?
Well, those links are also below the YouTube video if you're viewing there. And of course, I have full reviews of all the cameras that we've talked about on YouTube too. In the links, you'll also see you could buy a Cameralabs t-shirt if you want to look as cool as I do here. I'm certainly not cool at the moment. I'm very, very hot. But yeah, it's all there. So check that out. Let us know what you think in the comments. I hope you're still enjoying this podcast chatty format between Doug and I. I'm certainly enjoying our chats again, Doug. And of course, there's still the separate full reviews if you preferred those or you want some more detail. So that's it. If you like it, give us a like, subscribe, and tell us what you want to hear or see more of.
That's it. Okay. Thanks, Gordon, and thanks to everybody for watching and listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Cameralabs Photography Podcast. Bye-bye.